Hi, my name is Jade Campbell and I'm a Year 11 student at Canada Anglican College in Brisbane. Last year, as part of CHAC's Enterprise program, I undertook a course of study known as the Project, which encourages students to pursue a passion project for a semester. My passions being diving and sharks, I decided to try and develop a project that would let me do both of these things. My project was centered around understanding the human interactions with sharks, but more specifically, understanding scuba divers' motivations, experience, and behaviours when diving with grey-nosed sharks. In this brief presentation, I'm not going to repeat too much of what's included on my poster, but I'll provide more context behind my research and present some more data. So I'm going to start quickly by just presenting some data which highlights the nature and issues with my sample. While this slide shows the dynamics of the shark season at Flat Rock, I've included it to emphasize the impacts of COVID-19 on my project. For extended periods of time, Southeast Queensland was locked down, meaning no diving or no divers to sample. Additionally, the Queensland border was also completely shut for the entire period, so no one could get in or out. This limited diver options, which resulted in my sample being almost exclusively a local population, 98% of which were Southeast Queensland residents. With few options available, there were many repeat divers at Manta Lodge during the shark season, which affected my recruitment. As a result, I ended up with an experienced cohort that was very familiar with the dive site. For example, 50% of the cohort had done at least 100 dives. Almost 50% undertook 30 to 200 dives per year, and 30% in this sample had dived with Manta Lodge more than 50 times. Moving on, here we can see that this sample were a very sharky bunch, with 83% of divers motivated to see megafauna such as sharks, rays, whales, or dolphins. Supporting my previous comment about this group being a sharky bunch, overall the motivations with the highest mean scores related to encountering grey-nosed sharks and apex predators in their natural environment and having a general interest in sharks. The next highest grouping of motivations linked to conservation themes such as raising awareness for shark protection. Intrinsic or internal motivations such as diving with sharks because it's on your bucket list or for the adrenaline rush have lower mean scores. These intrinsic motivations are, however, more important for less experienced divers. T-tests indicate that intrinsic motivations such as because diving with sharks is on my bucket list are significantly more important for inexperienced divers than they are for experienced divers. Conversely, conservation-related and shark-specific motivations are significantly stronger motivators for experienced divers. This is consistent with suggestions by Jaide, who proposes a diver career ladder, whereby new or less experienced divers seek status and esteem by collecting stories of their encounters with big fish, and especially sharks. Similarly, AMSA et al. Report that less experienced divers participating in cage diving with great white sharks in the Neptune Islands in South Australia are predominantly motivated by the adrenaline rush or the concept of a bucket list activity, while Lucrezi et al. Note that thrilling experiences play a secondary role in motivating experienced divers. As noted on my poster, overall my sample had strong pro-environmental attitudes and were unlikely to be rule breakers. This reflects a number of other studies that note that more specialised divers exhibit stronger pro-environmental attitudes and behavioural obligations regarding responsible underwater behaviour. Anderson and Loomis, however, found relatively few differences in divers' behavioural norms or attitudes based on specialisation level. They note that scuba divers may differ from other recreationists because they receive considerable training. This training and associated assessment expose divers to particular sets of social norms. This exposure increases as divers climb Jaide's dive career ladder via increasingly advanced and specialized certifications. Based on this, to examine behaviors, I segmented the sample based on certification level to reflect specialization. The only behavioral question that exhibited any significant differences was, I know the appropriate behavior for diving with grey-nosed sharks, with highly experienced or professional divers exhibiting significantly higher levels of perceived behavioral control. Based on recreation specialization theory and the theory of planned behaviour, which note that the greatest influence on underwater behaviour is largely related to skills and knowledge, and hence the ability to perform particular behaviours, this is not unexpected. It is also interesting to note that while 80% of respondents stated that they strongly agreed or agreed with the statement, I know the appropriate behaviour for diving with grey-nosed sharks, and almost 50% stated that they were aware of the code of conduct for diving with grey-nosed sharks. only 7% could actually correctly identify the actual inclusions of the Diving with Grey Nose Sharks Code of Conduct. The data suggest a considerable amount of confusion, with responses indicating that divers simply guessed as to what was actually comprised in the Diving with Grey Nose Sharks Code of Conduct. Despite this apparent confusion about the Code of Conduct, only 2 breaches were noted on observation dives. Both of these were photographers interrupting the swimming patterns of the grey nose sharks. As you can see on the poster, similar to AMSA L, my data also highlights the importance of dive staff as social referents that influence diver behaviour. Given that the Code of Conduct for Diving with Grey Nose Sharks is a key communication tool between dive staff and divers, and the apparent lack of understanding of the Code of Conduct, ensuring that dive staff emphasise things like the Code of Conduct in pre-dive settings should guide positive behaviour. So, if we synthesise this data relating to experience, specialisation and diver motivation, we can place our flat rock shark divers along Bryan's recreation specialisation continuum. It suggests that as divers progress along the continuum from generalists to specialists, their motivations shift from the thrill and status of the encounter to be more aligned with increasing shark-related conservation issues. It also highlights that they can exhibit committed pro-environmental attitudes and beliefs and will share a sense of obligation to engage in pro-environmental behaviours, irrespective of experience or specialisation. Understanding the profile of wildlife tourists like shark divers is also important in understanding resource life cycles and developing appropriate management strategies. Several studies have shown that whale shark tourism at Ningaloo Marine Park in Western Australia have developed according to the trajectory proposed by Doofus and Dearden's wildlife tourism framework. It suggests that as wildlife tourism sites become more popular, the more specialised market is overwhelmed by less experienced users that bring with them new expectations, increased infrastructure requirements, and more mediation between themselves and the focal species. Given that the divers in my study were relatively experienced and a specialised cohort, one could place the flat rock dive site at the lower end of the growth curve. However, as noted earlier, the impact of COVID-19 border restrictions is likely to have biased my sample, and I suspect that the profile of divers at flat rock is further along the development curve, with a higher proportion of novice or generalist divers beginning to participate in shark diving. Indeed, on the few dives that I've managed to fit in this season, with open borders, I've already noticed a distinct shift in diver profiles. Given this, I'd like to redo the study under more normalised conditions for a broader participant scope. I'd also like to do it on a seasonal basis to see, for example, if the profile of shark divers is the same as the profile for manta divers. Finally, I'd also perhaps include personality profiling using validated tools such as the 16PF. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.